You never see positive drug stories on the news, do you? Isn't that weird? Since most of the experiences I've had on drugs were real fucking positive.
In a way, by making these drugs illegal, we're setting ourselves up for a potential catastrophe someday when some side effect is overlooked because the drugs were not rationally reviewed with an eye not toward keeping them out of the hands of the public, but with an eye toward public safety and educating the public in safe use of these things. The state should not, in the matter of drugs, any more than in the matter of sex, act as the secret agent for the agenda of the church. And that's what's happening. People want to stimulate themselves. They want to explore their consciousness. They want to sedate themselves. Who are we to stand in their way with a moral ideology and the long, heavy arm of the law to interfere with that? It distorts civilized values. But that's the bottom line. Drug repression distorts civilized values and political discourse.
Drug problem, man. There's all those drug stores, right? Every 3 or 4 blocks, there's a big sign. Drugs. Open all night. Drugs. We deliver. Drugs. Cut rate. Drugs. It's the biggest thing on their sign. Cosmetics, sundries, drugs. And the pharmacist is always stoned. You ever notice that? Check his eyes. He's experimenting with something back there. How come he can never fill a prescription right away, you know? Really, he always gives you that, better come back in about an hour. I can't even read the bastard, you know? It's no accident that we're drug-oriented, really. The drug companies got us that way, and they'd like to keep us that way. I mean, that's a simple thing. They start you early with the oral habit. Little orange-flavored aspirin for children. 2 in the mouth, son. Something wrong with your head? 2 in the mouth. Remember that, head, mouth. These are orange. There'll be other colors later on. They even named it after a saint to throw you off, you know? It's all right, son. 2 in the mouth. St. Joseph. Remember Papa Chocks? Papa Chock! Wow, you know. Guy goes to a dance when he's 13. How's your head? 2 in the mouth, man, you know. Mom's got her fix. Coffee freaks running around. Alcohol. You know, that's the biggest, of course, and most abused. And incredible. 50% of all traffic deaths. No, yes, that's about 25,000, right. 50% of traffic deaths. 40% of all arrests, traceable. 50% of all first admissions to mental institutions, traceable to alcohol. And then, of course, there's diabetes, gout, high blood pressure, heart disease, insanity, divorce. So I always say, drink up, Shriners, whenever I see a couple of them, you know? When they talk about drugs, they don't talk about all of them. That's the problem. They don't mention coffee. The low end of the speed spectrum, I grant you. But there are coffee freaks. And they're walking around, nobody, you know, worried about it or anything. Mrs. Olson never tells you about that mild speed lift, you know? Because she's shooting freeze-dried Folgers, right? But you've seen the coffee freak in the office, haven't you? The guy who drops 8 or 9 cups every morning and always in a good mood. Hi, how are you? Warm that up for you? Okay, yeah, hi, how are you? Hey, good to see you. Always in a nice mood, fine, until the coffee urn breaks, man. Then he's the first cat over. What do you mean broken, man? Well, plug it in, man. Turn it around. Never mind, man. Put some water in. Holy shit, man. Turn the plug around. Man. And then he goes out and scores because he's the one who's hooked, right? I know it's just a dopey example, but that's the beginning of it. Then you have housewives and the diet pills. Mom found out there's a lot more than dieting in those pills, man. Help you grind your teeth and feel great, too. Keep on the phone a lot. Hi, how are you, Marge? Anyway, look at that. What are you? Where are you going, Mom? Shopping at midnight? Well, they're open, you know. Never mind. I'll see you later, man. And athletes got into uppers. College athletes. The right wing's last line of defense on campus. And they're doing amphetamines. Remember when being up for the game used to be kind of a spiritual thing? Now, man, you up for the game? Been up all week, man.
Prohibition doesn't eliminate the market for drugs. Okay? The rhetoric of some politicians, some policymakers, acts as though by passing a law, we can get rid of drug use, but of course that's blatantly false. Prohibition probably does have some effect in reducing drug use. The evidence would suggest small effects, but clearly huge markets remain, okay, despite the fact that we have quite severe penalties for selling drugs, for possessing drugs, and so on. Okay? So what prohibition does is it creates a black market. It creates an underground market in which people buy and sell drugs. And in that black market, a bunch of really unfortunate things happen. In the black market, we see far more violence than we would see if drugs were legal and transacted in legal markets. Why? Because black market suppliers and consumers for any good can't resolve their differences of opinion, their disputes, okay, with courts, with lawyers. They do so with guns because they're not allowed access to the legal dispute resolution system. Prohibition generates corruption. That's especially obvious in many sort of developing countries that are suppliers of drugs because, again, the people in the drug industry can't have ballot initiatives. They can't lobby Congress in the standard way that most businesses do. They engage in bribes to jurors, to police, to judges, and so on. Okay? Prohibition generates income-generating crime, theft, prostitution, and so on by forcing the prices of drugs to be much higher. Prohibition lowers quality control. So the people who continue to use drugs, despite prohibition, are clearly worse off. They don't know what dosage they're getting. They don't know what adulterants might be in the drugs. And of course, they face the risk of going to jail, which is one of the worst things that can happen to you, far worse than most kinds of simple use of even the strong illegal drugs. We get greater spread of HIV because of prohibition. Under prohibition, we don't give people easy access to clean needles. We force the price of drugs to be much higher, so people have a strong incentive to inject to get a big bang for the buck. Much of the spread of HIV in the last 20 years in the US has been the result of intravenous drug use, of sharing dirty needles. That's directly a result of prohibition. Because of prohibition, we have limitations on medical research. We have limitations on civil liberties, all sorts of extremely aggressive policies, such as knocking down doors without no-knock warrants and things like that, that sometimes put innocent people at great risk and more generally infringe on reasonable notions of civil liberties. We've created havoc in many supplier countries because we have pushed them to try to enforce the drug prohibition that we think is the good policy. And the list goes on. When you listen to that list, you think, gee, even if I really don't like drugs, even if I really wish everybody did not use drugs, there's got to be a better approach. The particular approach we're using now is just incredibly insane. So what's the alternative? The obvious alternative to economists is a sin tax. Sin tax, or some people get upset when I use the word sin because they think I'm disapproving of drugs. I'm just using the word sin tax because that's the common term. Compare a prohibition to a policy of simply imposing a relatively high tax rate, okay, on drugs, similar to what we do for alcohol and tobacco. Okay? Can show in a very straightforward way with standard economics that any increase in price and reduction in consumption that you can achieve via prohibition, you can also achieve, okay, with the appropriate size sin tax, assuming that you devote appropriate resources, roughly the same resources, to enforcing that enforcing that sin tax as you were using to enforce that prohibition. So First, we've gotten about the same increase in price and the same reduction in consumption, but there's a crucial difference. With the sin tax, okay, government collects a lot of tax revenue, and the tax revenue is a transfer from people who purchase drugs to the general coffers. It can be used to build hospitals, it can be used for tax rebates, it can be used for other things. When we have prohibition, we force huge expenditures of resources on extra judges and jurors and prisons and so on, okay, in order to enforce, okay, the underground trade. We draw all sorts of resources into the production of drugs because it's done in a much more expensive way when it's driven underground. So we're clearly better off by enforcing the same increase in price and reduction in consumption that we've decided is appropriate if you accept that perspective, which I don't particularly, but if you wanted to do that, okay, by using the sin tax rather than by using, okay, the prohibition that we currently use. Perfect timing there. So the economic reasoning says, okay, maybe there's a case for some kinds of interventions to reduce some kinds of drug use in some circumstances, but no good case that there should be a general presumption that somebody sitting in his or her living room consuming drugs and not doing anything else to anybody should be interfered with in any way, shape, or form. Okay? So there's not a good case for us to intervene at all. If we're going to intervene at all, okay, we should be intervening in a way which achieves a good ratio of benefits to cost. The prohibitionist mentality just assumes that the only goal is reducing drug use. It doesn't think carefully about at what cost. And we are experiencing enormous cost in the attempt to achieve reductions in drug use and not achieving especially large reductions in drug use, if any. So we're mainly getting cost and very little benefit. Whatever benefit we are getting, we could get much more effectively with the taxation approach. Okay? So I just want to end by saying one more time, I think it's a tragedy that in a country that prides itself on a history of freedom and liberty, the burden of proof is now on the legalizers and not on the prohibitionist. Okay? The presumption should always be that people get to do what they want to do unless someone can show convincingly and compellingly and in a quantitatively important way that one person's exercise of individual choice, okay, is seriously inhibiting something else, somebody else's liberty, somebody else's ability to lead their own lives. And I don't think the prohibition argument has come anywhere close to meeting that burden of proof. Thank you.
Your feeling when I say drugs?
Well, drugs is a word which has polluted the well of language. Part of the reason we have a drug problem is because we don't have an intelligent language to talk about substances, plants, psychedelic states of mind, sedative states of mind, states of amphetamine excitation. We can't make sense of the problem and the opportunities offered by substances unless we clean up our language. Drugs is a word that's been used by governments to make it impossible to think creatively about the problem of substances and abuse and availability and so forth and so on.
In the minds of the people, the word drugs, which was once used as healing medications, and still drug companies that make, I don't know, Tylenol are considered very legitimate.
Well,
Yet-
so it's a kind of a paradox, isn't it? Drugs mean that which cures us and the greatest social problem of the generation. So there, right there, you see the schizophrenia involved in thinking about drugs. Apparently there are good drugs sanctioned by science and medicine, and bad drugs used by brown people in strange rites and growing in unusual plants in distant parts of the world. This kind of thinking, because it's naive, leads, of course, to social problems and bad politics and bad social policy.
Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.